A warm welcome to everyone joining us today from around the world. Morning to the folks from US, and good afternoon to the folks from Europe, and good evening to the folks from Sri Lanka. So lovely to have all of you here. And before I hand over to Pete, I will very briefly introduce him. Pete barely needs any introduction. He's an extremely well-known figure in the Agile software community. So we are thrilled to present this session with him. So just to give a little bit of background about Pete. Pete has served as the chairman of the Scrum Alliance and also its vice chair, and has been a board member for a long period of time in that organization. So Pete has written some of the seminal texts on Agile methodology, and his texts are probably one of the most read introductions. One of his texts, the Scrum Primer, is probably one of the most read introductions to Agile. Pete was formerly the VP of Product Development at Yahoo in the early to mid 2000s. And prior to that, served as the Senior Vice President of CNET Networks, which was acquired later by CBS. Pete has also co-founded GameSpot, which was again acquired by ZDNet, all a little bit back in the day. Pete has studied at Harvard and Stanford, and has been a visiting lecturer to the University of Singapore and a number of other institutions for the past few years. Pete currently resides in Sri Lanka, and that's how we came across Pete and managed to rope him into Calcey. For the last 2 years or so, Pete has been a prized advisor to Calcey, and we've loved his practical and insightful inputs into our own internal sessions. So we felt that this public session has been a long time coming, and we are thrilled to have all of you joining us today. So without further ado, let me hand it over to Pete.
All right, thanks so much, Mehdi. It's a very kind introduction, and I am a huge fan of Calcey. I got to know Calcey when I moved to Sri Lanka about 10 years ago. I live here with my family. It's a wonderful country, and part of what drew me to the country was the software industry here, which obviously is, because Sri Lanka as a nation is much smaller, just in terms of population than other countries in the region. In order to compete, I think the Sri Lankan software industry has really had to focus on talent and sort of capability and quality, and that makes it I think a particularly kind of fertile ground for agile practices. So anyway, I'm very proud to be associated with Calcey, and thank you all for coming out tonight, wherever you are, whatever time of day it is. And so what I thought I'd share is some of the lessons I've learned from 20 years of building products. I built a couple products that I would say are great products, like GameSpot. I built some products that are kind of mediocre products whose names will go unmentioned, and I built a few products that were just truly dreadful. And honestly, I learned the most about product ownership from those products. The successful products don't teach you anything. It's the failures that teach you the most. So I'm gonna share with you a couple of the lessons I've learned from some of those, particularly some of those failures, and hopefully you won't have to make the same mistakes I did. And please do post lots of questions to the Slido link. I've blocked time at the end of the hour for questions. I hope we can get lots of questions. So let's dive in. Now, the first lesson learned that I want to share is how to speed up a development team. Now, I'm going to draw a graph here. It's a timeline. So we're going to put output on the vertical axis, and we've got time on the horizontal axis. Now let's imagine we have a group of developers here, and they're going along at this level of output. And let's imagine that we, as product owner, want them to produce more, understandably so. And so we go to the developers and we give them a really inspiring speech, and we say, I have been so impressed with the amazing work you've been doing, and I think if you really believe in yourselves and work harder and work smarter and work some nights and weekends, I think you can do even more every day and every sprint. I believe in you. I want you to make it happen. And we've all heard that speech before. Some of us on the call have probably given that speech before. Now, what happens to output when the developers, we put more pressure on them, maybe ask them to work longer work hours? What happens to the output of the team? Well, obviously it goes up, at least for a little while. But unfortunately, very quickly in real life, burnout sets in. Now, when we say burnout, we mean, that the developers, they start to get tired. And when people start to get tired, they start to work more slowly. They also start to make more mistakes. They start to make more bad decisions. They start to do things the fast way rather than the right way. And you'll also start to see motivation go down, morale goes down. You start to see more conflict between the people. People start to call in sick more often, and output starts to drop. But what's interesting is as the burnout gets worse and worse, the output doesn't just go back to where it was, it goes even lower. And you wind up usually at this even lower level of output here. And the team is still working long hours under a lot of pressure, but the output they're producing is actually lower than it was here when they were working at a sustainable pace. Now, what happens to quality while all of this is going along? So they're going along at this good level of quality here, and the developers start rushing. Now, there's an old saying in the software industry, you probably heard this before. When a programmer rushes, they make more mistakes. And when a tester rushes, they find fewer mistakes. And a team that's rushing produces much lower quality. So the developers here, they start rushing, they start making more mistakes, and you see quality drop as well. And the problem is, once you get to this point here, the team is still working under more pressure. They're still working long work hours, but because of the burnout, you actually have lower output. And because of all the rushing, you have lower quality as well. And this is a really pretty dreadful place to be in, because the problem, once you get down to here, getting back up to here is actually surprisingly difficult. Burnout, unfortunately, is really hard to back your way out of. Now, it's for that reason that I think smart product owners really focus on avoiding ever getting into this state in the first place. So let's wind the clock back. How would a great product owner increase output without creating that risk of burnout and quality issues and so forth? Well, what we do is we take a page out of Lean. Now in Lean, one of the key ideas in Lean is if you want to increase productivity, you eliminate waste. Now in Agile, we instead of saying waste, we typically say impediments. We reduce impediments. Now impediments is just our shorthand for things that slow us down and hold us back. It's basically anything that gets in our way, interrupts us, distracts us, causes mistakes, creates rework, causes waste, hurts our motivation, or just, stops us from being as good as we can be. Now what's interesting is when you reduce an impediment that the team has, what happens to output goes up, and it stays up. See, once you've reduced an impediment, as long as that impediment doesn't come back again, once the impediment is reduced, you get more output from that point onwards. It's a little bit like, if you repair a flat tire on your car, you remove that impediment, you fix the flat tire, you get to drive with less engine effort, and you get to drive faster from that point forwards. So it's the beauty of reducing impediments is people work the same work hours, still at a sustainable pace, but with fewer impediments, you get higher output. Now what's going on with quality once we reduce the impediments? Well, quality, when you reduce impediments, quality doesn't go down. In fact, in a lot of cases, when you reduce impediments, quality can also increase. So we don't just get higher output, we get higher quality. So this brings us to a core strategy. I think it's a lesson that I've learned over the years, and I think it's something that great product owners are really focused on: to increase output, reduce impediments. Now, let's translate this into the practical kind of real world. One of the things I really like to do as a product owner is sit down with the whole team and make a list of all of the impediments that people can think of. This, I'll show you, this is one that I produced with a team I was working with. This is a list of all of their impediments. We spent an hour brainstorming. We came up with about 60 different impediments. It ranged from things like disruptions and interruptions, people not having powerful enough PCs, gaps in the requirements, difficulty with the communication, not having the right tools to work with, not having enough automation in place, too many audits and too much red tape, too many external dependencies, unrealistic goals, a long approval process, whole bunch of different impediments. And when you can reduce any of these impediments, output's going to go up. Now, here's the thing to remember. You don't have to solve these. You don't have to solve all of them. In fact, you don't have to solve any of them. You just have to make them a little bit smaller. And one thing I coach product owners, particularly product owners where the product owner is physically separate from the developers, particularly if the product owner is a client and the developers are working for a vendor. One of the things I coach product owners to do is create an environment where there can be a lot of openness about what impediments are, and recognize that no team is perfect, no organization is perfect. Every team in the world, even the best teams in the world, have lots and lots of impediments. And the key is to make those impediments visible, especially as a product owner, those impediments that I'm causing. Because the funny thing is, a lot of times what I discover as a product owner is that some of the biggest impediments are things that I myself am causing, and that the team is maybe a little uncomfortable bringing up with me. So creating an environment of openness where I'm as a product owner out there really asking the team, what as a product can I do to help reduce impediments, either impediments that I'm causing or impediments that I can be helpful in removing. All right. So helping the team reduce impediments as a way of constantly increasing the output. Now, the next lesson learned is how to handle new requirements. The sort of the alternate title of this is somebody's come off mute there. Vimukti, I'm gonna put you on mute. All right. The subtitle for this is half of what you think you want, you don't need. And a lot of what you actually need, you haven't actually thought of yet. So this, I would say this is sort of like the fundamental reality of product ownership, is that we're steering our ship to a destination that doesn't exist yet, a destination that we don't know about yet. And the destination that we're steering it to that we know of is the wrong destination, almost guaranteed. And so we have to, as a product owner, have strategies to be able to handle new requirements without it throwing the entire, for example, delivery schedule and budget into disarray, or without creating a heavier and heavier workload for the developers that's going to burn them out. So how do we do that? Well, okay, so let's I want to just make sure we're all on the same page. I'm gonna explain this in the context of Scrum. And if you're using one of the other Agile methods, you'll be able to translate. But in Scrum, we've got the Scrum team, which consists of the product owner, developers, and Scrum Master. And at the start of the work in the kickoff, the product owner identifies this product goal, this destination that we're aiming for to deliver down the road. And the product owner creates a product backlog. Hopefully it consists mostly of features or stories. In other words, things with direct value to customers or users. Let's take as our example, let's imagine we're building an airline website. And what are some of the features or stories for the product backlog? They'd be things like enable customer to book a flight, enable customer to check in online, enable customer to join the frequent flyer program. So we've got a product backlog full of features like this. And one of the first things we do in the kickoff is we break these into sub features, smaller, more bite-sized bits of functionality. Ones at the top, we split even smaller. And then we're going to be doing sprints, working towards something that we can release at the end. Now, let's imagine we get a few sprints in, and we've got a bunch of these product backlog items, these features or stories done. And our product owner is brushing their teeth in the mirror in the morning. And all of a sudden, our product owner has a great idea for a new feature. And this new feature is really valuable. I mean, it's going to bring so much value to the users. It's going to bring so much revenue to the company, whatever, but it's really valuable. And the first thing the product owner thinks is, oh, why didn't I think of that 2 months ago at the start? But they didn't. You know, this is the reality. You don't pick when your good ideas come. They come when they're ready to come. And a lot of the time it's once we've actually got some working functionality in hand that sparks those new ideas. Now what options does the product owner have? Well, one option, the product owner could just put this on the product backlog. There's just one problem with that. If the product owner does that, the overall amount of product backlog increases. So the product owner is going to have to add additional time into the schedule. We're going to have to extend that release date and be able to do more spreads. Another way to visualize this, we've got these 4 factors: the scope, by that we mean the product backlog, the functionality we're building; the schedule, and by that we mean the number of sprints we're doing; the cost, that's how much money we're going to be spending; and the quality of what we're producing. We've got these 4 basic factors at play, and if the scope increases, in other words, the product backlog gets bigger, then the schedule is going to have to increase. We're going to need to do more sprints. And if the schedule increases, the cost is going to increase because we're going to have to pay for more time from the team. The only bit of good news here is the quality is going to stay high. Does that make sense? Now, what would happen if the product owner increased the scope but kept the schedule the same and the cost the same, and just went to the team and said, I believe in you. I want you to make it happen. In other words, put more pressure on them, ask them to work nights and weekends. What's going to happen to the quality? The quality is going to go down. See, the funny thing is these 4 factors, what you learn in practice is that they are tightly coupled to each other. They're tightly linked. If you change one of these, you're almost certainly going to have to change at least one of the others. And if you don't willingly change one of the others, it's going to change all by itself, particularly in the case of quality there. So the first option, the product owner could put this onto the product backlog, but that's going to increase the cost of the project and the amount of time, or it's going to cause the quality to go down because we're trying to squeeze more work in. So what other better option exists? Well, the better option, of course, is to find some other stuff in here that's not quite as important, not quite as valuable. Now, where would the product owner look for something that's lower value? Down here at the bottom. Let's see how much this product owner would have to take out. It looks like about that much. Now, what's the value of these product backlog items, these features and stories down here? These are some of the very lowest value features and stories down here. So what the product owner decides to do is to take those out to free up some space to put this in. Now, they're not probably going to put this in at the bottom. What they'll probably do is shift everything else down and put this in up here at the top. So the product owner is taking scope out from the bottom and adding scope in at the top so that the overall scope is the same amount. And the schedule can stay the same. So the release date is going to stay the same. The cost of the project is going to stay the same. And the quality will stay the same. In fact, the only thing that's changed is the value that we're going to deliver. And what's happened to the value? The value is increased because we took out low value stuff and added in high value stuff. So one of the hardest things I found as a product owner in the shift over to the sort of agile mindset is I came from a traditional environment where we thought of a set of requirements for a project or for a new product delivery as being this fixed set of things that we're trying to deliver everything. Whereas in Agile, we're looking at the product backlog as being this constantly evolving, currently up-to-date snapshot of what we think we want. But we know it's going to change. We know new things are going to be added into it, and less important things are going to be taken out of it. Now, of course, the key to make this work is to have stuff that you can take out. And I'm going to show you next how we do that, how we make sure we have stuff down here that can be taken out for those inevitable new ideas that are coming in. But I think that one of the most important things for product owners to never lose sight of is the fact that we have not had our best ideas yet. Our best ideas are still to come, and we have to be prepared to be able to respond to that. And for most of us, where time to market, I mean, many of Calcey's clients are operating in an environment super fast moving. Time to market is crucial. Budget is crucial. We want to get something into the hands of our customers or our users as quickly as possible. It has to be high quality. So to make that work, we've got to have stuff that we can take out to make room for those new ideas. So that brings us to the next lesson learned, which is how to structure a product backlog. One of the really interesting things, if you look at a product backlog, if you were to draw a bar chart showing the value of these product backlog items, sometimes people say, well, it's if I was showing the value of all of my features and functionality, it's going to look something like this. Everything is maximum value, but of course, in real life, I don't think I've ever seen a project or a product like that. We've certainly got some of these features that are very high value. For example, if going back to that airline website, a feature like this, enable customer to book a flight. If we were writing this as a user story, it would be something like, as a customer wants to travel somewhere, I want to find and book a flight so I can fly. So a feature like this is very, very high value because this is where all the revenue and profit comes from. This is what the customers want to do when they come to the website, most of them. So it's very, very high value. We also have other features that are valuable, but not quite as valuable as this one. For example, this one here, it's more medium value. Enable customer to join the frequent flyer program. Now that's it's valuable for sure, but it's not quite as valuable as this because this doesn't bring any direct revenue or profit with it. It's more about customer loyalty and indirect revenue and profit. So it's valuable, not quite as valuable. And then we have very low value features like this one. For example, on a lot of airline websites, you may not even ever notice this, but you can look up and see what movies and TV shows are playing on the entertainment system this month. List this month's in-flight movies. Now this is very low value, partly because most customers don't really care about that. And even those that do, I mean, it's not actually going to affect their decision whether to book on this airline or another. I mean, this is a nice little feature to offer. It's nice for branding, but it's not really going to make much of a difference to the business anyway. See, the reality is if you go down a list of features, realistically, it's going to look something like this. You've got a whole bunch of different features with different levels of value. Now what we do in Agile methods like Scrum is the product owner sorts this list by value so that the product backlog looks something like this. Now obviously it's not going to look quite as perfect as this curve here because sometimes you have low value things that have to go high on the product backlog because of dependencies or something like that. But overall, it should look pretty close to this, where the stuff at the very top of the product backlog is the very most valuable features and functionality, and the stuff at the bottom is the least valuable. Now, what's the benefit of this? Well, let's imagine we get started in this project. We do the first sprint. We build these features. Now, the beautiful thing here is we're one sprint in, and we've got some of our highest value functionality, boom, ready to get hands-on with. And if it's not exactly right, we've still got 8 sprints here left to fix those problems, to make it better. And if we need to spend more time on these, but we don't want to change the release date, well, we've down here at the very bottom, we've got a whole bunch of these low value items down here that could be de-scoped. So if we need to spend more time on this high value stuff, we can actually very easily do that at a very low cost in terms of functionality. Making these high value things much, much better is totally worth giving up things like, look up in-flight movies. And as we go sprint by sprint, we do another sprint, we do another set of features, another sprint. We keep going in this way. Now, what's really cool is at this moment, we're halfway through the project. But in terms of the overall value that we have done, it's much more than half the value. It's more like 80 to 90% of the value. That's pretty cool. I mean, you're halfway through the project, you've got 80 to 90% of the value. What a lot of product owners do is they actually do some sort of an early access beta, you could call it, whatever you like, but some sort of an early release to get that in the hands of the users. And the great thing too, if you get this stuff in the hands of your users, if they come back and they say, what you built is junk, you've still got a bunch of time left to fix it. And spending more time making these better at the expense of not getting this functionality, that's a great option to have. So when you think about it, this becomes almost like, it's almost like a sort of a plan B that's built into your plan A. In case you're not quite as good as you think you are, in case what you thought customers wanted turns out isn't actually exactly what they wanted. But the other big benefit here is, let's imagine we get to the end, and for whatever reason, we get to this release date and we only get down to here. Maybe there was more rework and revisions and improvements. Maybe, maybe the work turned out to be more complex than the developers wanted. Maybe the level of fine tuning and pixel perfection that you needed was at a level that it did require a lot of that refinement and fine tuning. Now, the bad news is we're at the delivery date and these things down here are not done. But the good news is that these are the lowest value product backlog items, the lowest value features and stories in the entire project. The stuff that is done and probably represents 99% of your value. And what we do as product owners, smart product owners, is we put down here product backlog items that we can drop or postpone to later release. My nickname for this is, or my shorthand for this is scope buffer. It's a kind of buffer that we put in, but it's buffer in the scope. Scope buffer that can be taken out so that we can still deliver a valuable product. We deliver it right on schedule. Now, how do we identify that scope buffer? Well, a technique that I'm a big fan of is it's Moscow prioritization. Moscow is an acronym for must have, should have, could have, won't have. And then what we're doing as a product owner is we're going through all of our functionality and identifying which of these four groupings does each feature fit into. We take our features, we break them into smaller slices, and then we put them into one of these four categories. Now, must have, this means it's truly critical for success, where the product would be literally unusable without this. And the absence of this would prevent a release. This is actually, must have is generally a pretty strict and small category. The things that are truly must have, where literally it would prevent us from going live, it's usually a fairly small percentage. Bigger number is should haves. These are things that are very important, maybe very, very, very important, but they're not truly critical for success. The product would be usable, but people would notice if it was missing. And then the could haves is for things that are useful, but not of high importance. Things that users would appreciate, but the absence would probably not be noticed or not be a major concern. And then the won't haves, these are things that, are not going to be part of the product in the near term, but we want to keep them. It's almost like the parking lot for things we might want later. Now, the idea is once we've categorized our features into one of these four groupings, then we can put the must haves at the top of the product backlog. And then below it, we can put the should haves, and below that, we can put the could haves. Now, the cool thing here, if you structure your product backlog like this, these must haves at the top, you'll notice they're the minimum viable product, or MVP. This, again, is the minimum functionality needed to have a usable product. And these items down here, they can be the scope buffer. All of these are functionality that can be removed or replaced. If delays occur, new requirements appear. So this right here is a kind of product backlog that when I'm coaching product owners, for example, I'm trying to coach them to get their functionality into these three basic groupings. This means, I mean, what's really interesting as well, when you think about it, if you've got your minimum viable product up here at the top of the product backlog, how many sprints, let's say it's going to take 8 sprints to finish all of this, you'll probably have your must-have items done by the end of sprint number 3. And at that point, once again, you're back in the position where you've got something that could be released. You've got that sort of, whatever you're going to call it, 0.9 beta, early access, whatever. So you've got that protection there. You can get those in the hands of your users, get them using it, and again, see if what you built actually is really truly what they need and like. And if they don't, you've got a whole bunch of these could have items down here that could be descoped, and you also have some should haves, which in a pinch you could descope. All right, so a product backlog that's structured like this, I think, gives us a whole lot of different options should things not go as planned. And again, what's the one thing we know as a product owner? Things won't go as planned. That's the only thing we know for certain, is that things won't go as planned. All right. Now, the next lesson learned in the last of the list is how to work effectively with remote teams. Now, this is by itself a 6-hour talk. And maybe if there's an interest, we could schedule that sort of stretching out over the future. This is a huge topic, obviously. And so I'm just going to share one small nugget. The one nugget that I think is actually the foundation for everything else. And it's this. And you can sum it up in a single sentence. Trust is a force multiplier. Trust is a force multiplier. When I say force multiplier, what I mean is trust is the thing that enables you to get the most out of the team that's doing the work, to deliver the most value to the customers, to deliver the highest quality, to deliver the fastest time to market. Everything that's necessary to do those things rests on a foundation of trust. Now, if you're in a low trust environment, let's say you're working remotely, you've got let's say the product owner in one place and the developers in another place. And particularly typically the product owner is going to be the client, and we've got the developers working for the vendor. Now, if it's a low trust relationship or a low trust environment that they're operating in, low trust between the product owner client and the developers on the vendor side, developers don't ask questions. And developers hide mistakes, and developers ignore concerns and worries that they have, risks that they see. They ignore them. They cover up problems, and they pretend all is well until it's not possible to pretend anymore, until the truth sort of forces its way out. And developers spend a lot of time hoping and praying. Now, by contrast, in a high trust environment, it's sort of the opposite, so developers in a high trust environment, they ask questions, even questions that they think might be dumb questions, because those are some of the most important questions. The dumber the question, the more important that it gets asked. And by asking more questions, they make far fewer mistakes. And developers bring up concerns, the worries, the risks. So those problems get sorted early. We intercept them when it's just a rain cloud on the horizon before it's turned into a full strength hurricane. And developers are open and honest. And developers do still hope and pray, but we do that anyway. Product owners do too. And I feel like you can look at any kind of a development project and you can put it somewhere on the scale. Now, the reality is we're human beings, and most of us start just kind of naturally when we're embarking on a working relationship with people that we don't know. we start down here, very low trust point. And gradually we sort of build up bit by bit. But the problem is something goes wrong and it can, boom, push you right back down to the end of the scale. And I feel like so much of successful work as part of geographically distributed teams is sort of finding ways to get that arrow, higher and higher up the scale and avoid the pitfalls that take us back down to the bottom. So what are some examples of things we can do to build trust? And again, this is, just a little kind of glimpse of some of the things we think about, just to kind of whet your appetite. But one of the things that I feel is crucially important is to establish real human relationships at the start. Now, one thing that I have always recommended to clients is, wherever possible, to make the trip to visit the team and spend time together in person. And this was a hard sell. I spent many years based in India, and convincing clients to come to Bangalore was hard, because Bangalore, if you haven't been there, it's a wonderful city, but it's also, the traffic is horrendous, and the noise and pollution can sometimes feel overwhelming, particularly for folks who who haven't traveled in this part of the world before. Sri Lanka, by contrast, is a whole different ballgame, and it's like you come here and there's some of the most beautiful beaches in the world, and not just beautiful beaches, beautiful mountains, and some of the loveliest people, and some of the most amazing food, and even right now, and you've probably seen headlines in the news, and there's some political stuff going on in the country and some financial stuff, but none of that has in any way affected the level of hospitality that visitors get, and if anything, folks here are even more welcoming and more excited to see foreigners visit, and so so coming and spending time physically with the team, it's hard to beat that. One of the things I've done with clients, when clients come to spend time with the team, we'll go out and we'll do things together. We'll do activities. A practice that I've done in the past is we invite the client for dinner in the home of one of the team members for a home cooked meal with the whole team and the family. And a lot of times it's, the old granny is doing the cooking, and, it creates, there's something primal about that experience. Another thing I've done is we'll go, and obviously, this depends on the client and the team and the city. But there was one team, we went with the client, we took the client to a temple, and we did a blessing ceremony for the project. And this client had never been in a temple before, and he was a little taken aback, but it was this amazing bonding experience. And from that point onwards in the project, anytime we got some bit of good fortune on the project, I was like, it's the puja, it's the puja still helping. So it's like building those human relationships. Now, what do we do in a time of COVID, or where travel just isn't an option? Well, we try to replicate that to the extent possible, and what we're doing is trying to put human beings and flesh and feelings and experiences behind the names and the faces. So we'll do interactive, icebreakers, where an icebreaker that I love is where we go around and everybody shares a little bit about their background, their hobbies, favorite foods, favorite movie, and then we share our most embarrassing moment. Now, you can't share your most embarrassing moment with a group of people and not have that establish at least a little bit of trust with those people. And people have a laugh together. What we're trying to do is we're trying to make people real and trying to make people. So finding ways to establish real human relationships. and make people feel part of the team as well. I mean, I can't tell you how much of a difference it makes when, a client sends a box with kind of like merchandise swag, just some t-shirts and some caps with their company logo on it. Because people wear that stuff and it makes them feel a little bit a part of that. And especially if you're a small or sort of fast growing enterprise, a startup, it just, share that spirit with the team. It can really, it can make them really feel a part of it. Another thing I also really recommend to clients is understanding the inherent power differential. There's an old saying that so the people with the power usually don't notice the power that they have. People who don't have the power are keenly aware of the other person's power. And so, in any client vendor relationship, the client is always seen as this incredibly powerful, individual, and they are, they pay our paychecks. And so the team oftentimes comes into this with, a real sense of that power. And I feel like oftentimes, clients, to their credit, often behave towards teams in a very egalitarian way, but sometimes in ways that can unintentionally create, problems. For example, speaking very sharply to a team, in a way that we would talk to a colleague or an equal, but that to the team is just like, it's like, lightning bolts striking the ground all around us. It can be really kind of disheartening, and that kind of thing can really actually, without realizing it, really set back the trust relationship. So simple things like showing respect and rewarding honesty. These can go a really very long way, especially in cultures where there are certain cultures where face and allowing people to maintain face, and for example, if we have a difficult conversation, having it in a one-on-one rather than a public fashion, those are some of the kinds of things that can really make a difference. And one thing I found, there's also something that just little things that we can do that show respect. So for example, like I found myself, and I make this mistake constantly, like I'll be working with a team in a different time zone, and I'll plan a meeting, and I'll think, oh yeah, that's their evening, but I won't really do the math. And then the call comes on, I'm like, hey, how are you doing? And they're like, oh yeah, it's 11 p.m. We want to be in, and so kind of sharing the pain, and it doesn't have to be sharing all the pain in terms of time zone difference, but creating some sense that, I know you guys are staying up late or getting up early. I feel like that can really go a long way too. And obviously, I mean, and this I say to clients, like, you're the client at the end of the day. You can kind of, pick the time a lot of the time, and but to the extent you're able to be mindful of that, it can really help. Another thing I found is, something that it's easy for us as clients sometimes to lose sight of is language differential. Particularly if our first language is English, we will come into a conversation with a linguistic facility that is maybe higher than that of the person we're talking to if English isn't their first language. And that language difference can create almost a sort of power dynamic that we're not aware of. And it can also affect us. I mean, I speak only from my own personal experience. I don't know if others have had this, but I found myself early on, especially in working with teams in foreign countries, when I talk to a developer in this part of the world, if their English was heavily accented or had a lot of grammatical errors or just wasn't smooth flowing, it almost made me, and I'm embarrassed to admit this, but it almost made me think less of them. It's like they're not quite as smart somehow. And it's hard. I mean, it's kind of a natural human reaction, I think, on some level. The thing I came to realize, though, is that oftentimes when one meets a person like that in the IT industry, one is talking to somebody who came from more modest background, didn't have, maybe weren't surrounded by spoken English at home, maybe went to a more modest school where the quality of English instruction wasn't quite as good. And the fact that this person is here talking to you now, the adversities that they had to overcome to get into a position where they're building software working for kind of world-class clients, what that tells you is this person has got some horsepower under the hood. This person is a world-class brain and has the tenacity to get things done. And the funny thing is, like, after all of these years, I come into a room, and when I see that person at the table, the one with the sort of more accented English, or the grammar that's not perfect, it's like, okay, that's the brain power here. And maybe that's almost like a kind of a reverse form of misinterpretation, but it's something just to kind of remind oneself of. I think that's actually something actually quite important to remind oneself of. Couple of other points. Agree on the rules of the game and then play by the rules. One thing I found is really important for building trust is consistency. Saying what you're going to do and then doing what you said you would do. And the more we can show consistency in behavior, the better. And coming up with sort of rules of the game, some kind of like a charter, that can actually be a really good trust building exercise, and it can kind of establish a good foundation for the working relationship. And just like just an example of what one of the rules might be. If you come to me with a problem, or a rule of the game that I was working with the team I was coaching recently, they said, if there's a problem, we're going to speak up. That's one of our rules of the game. If there's a problem, if we make a mistake, if we see a risk, we're going to speak up. But one of the companion rules to that is nobody will be punished for speaking up. So if you speak up, it's a good thing. Even if the news is bad, the fact that you're speaking up with the bad news is itself a good thing. Another, and the sort of the last on this list, this sort of short little snapshot, is scale the communication and be aware of signal to noise. And what do I mean by this? Well, there's this kind of like this hierarchy of communication, and it starts at the bottom level with text messages. And in terms of how much you can communicate in a text message, email is superior. Email, you can communicate more richly. You can have more content, more explanation. And better than email is a phone call. The richness of probably going from asynchronous to synchronous, sort of live, going back and forth, that's going to give you much better communication. And adding in the visual components, a video conference is superior to a phone call, and then of course in person is the best of all. So we've got this kind of hierarchy of communications modes, and if you were to sort of rate these on a scale of convenience, it looks something like this. Sending a 5-word text message is vastly more convenient than having an in-person meeting. The problem, though, is that the richness and fidelity curve is the exact opposite. The further to the left you go, the richer and truer that conversation is. And so what we're trying to figure out is how do we sort of scale the communication to the place on the scale where it needs to be. Now, obviously, if it's a quick, simple question, these are the perfect modes of communication. But if it's a difficult conversation, you try to have that in email, for example, it's going to be very difficult to make that successful. A difficult conversation that you transact via email is going to be very difficult. A phone call, or even better, a video conference, so we can see faces and get all of the nonverbal communication included, it's going to be much more successful. So in a way, one way to think of this is the more sensitive, the more crucial the communication, the further up this scale we want to be. The more sensitive, the more crucial, the farther to the left we want to get on this scale. And the sort of signal to noise, when you're just sending a text message or an email, the room for misunderstanding, the amount of comprehension to misunderstanding is much lower than when you're actually doing it farther to the left of the scale. So recognizing that if we're using these modes of communication, the room for misunderstanding is vastly greater. And particularly if we're dealing with a conversation that is more sensitive, more crucial, we want to get as far to the left on the scale as possible. Now, I know this is very sort of high level. It's just a brief snapshot of some of the things you can do to help build trust in that relationship, grow trust. Obviously, this is just the starting point for that whole question of how do we make physically or geographically separated teams successful. And again, if there's interest, maybe we could plan a session on that in the future. But I have been talking for an awfully long time. I think it's time for us to get some questions. Mudit, are you the question wrangler?
Yes, so I'll basically be feeding everyone's questions to Pete. So again, quick reminder, we have Slido open. We at this point, we have a couple of questions in there, but I'll give a minute to all the participants to go, look at the questions. If there's anything of particular interest, please upvote it and add in your own questions, clarifications in there. So Pete, to get us started, I have a question of my own. And this came to me during a recent conversation with a client. So this particular client, I think, is facing a fairly common situation. So it's a business. It's a business that's being digitized right now. So it's a matter of taking a bunch of things that were previously done manually and digitizing them. And the product manager in question is excellent at understanding these current processes, how the business runs today, and figuring out how to translate that into the digital realm, to the online to offline ramp, more or less. The client, the CEO of the company, was still a little bit frustrated with the product manager, though, because he was feeling that the product manager wasn't visionary enough. His complaint is that the product manager is getting a decent job done at the when it comes to translating the product into a digital product, but all the magic that can be built into a digital experience is not being done. And this is the CEO himself. He was empathetic, so he was like, I basically spent 80% of my time thinking about how to make this whole experience magical, whereas the product manager is probably spending 80% of his or her time tackling questions from the support team, tackling questions from marketing, figuring out what the dev team's priorities are, and how the timelines are crunching down. So the product manager is probably spending 80% of their time on all these operational stuff, and 20% on envisioning what the product could be. So he realized that there's this sort of dichotomy in how the two of them view the product, and he was trying to figure out a way to make the product manager bridge this gap. So I think this is where you want all the product managers to be. You want the sort of classic Steve Jobs like character to be a product manager. So if you are a product manager and you feel you have the same deficiency, what are your suggestions for trying to sort of skill up in this area? Really become this 360 manager that can take the product to the next level.
Yeah. Well, so one of the ways to think about it is we've got this these like a classic sort of 2x2 grid, and up here we have urgent and non-urgent. See if I can fit all of this. And one of the problems, of course, is our natural tendency is to spend most of our time in, we're going to draw this, most of our time over here, when in fact, where we should be spending most of our time is here. So one of the things that when I coach product owners is trying to identify and identify in a very granular way, like looking back at the last week, how much of our time did we spend in this zone here? What were the things we were doing in this zone? And you can look at it in terms of time or focus or whatever, whatever criteria, but figuring out, okay, so how do we start to ignore this stuff? And this is particularly, one of the problems there are product owners who rate very high on the conscientiousness scale. And those product owners tend to be very, very reliable, but overly focused on that because they want to be responsive to all the urgent stuff. And so it's like, how do we coach product owners to actually be a little bit unreliable? In other words, not tackle the urgent, unimportant stuff, and instead free up their focus and bandwidth to be able to spend more time in this zone right here. And some of it, honestly, is just time. It's like carving out and saying no to this stuff and freeing up time to focus on this stuff. Part of it too is the mechanisms we use, and there are lots of techniques you can use to brainstorm and to bring folks in and do sort of ideation, and lots of techniques out there for that. But I think on the most basic level, it starts with shifting time and focus from this space here over to this one. That's where I begin to tackle it.
Good. So I think that's definitely a great starting point. Is there any sort of resources that you could point out to product managers to kind of change their thinking, kind of upskill themselves in that regard, sort of how they envision the future of the product?
Yeah, I need to think, like if I were to pick just one thing to recommend, I need to think about that a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe if we post follow-up notes from this session, I could come up with a couple ideas.
Sure. Sounds good. So I think next we'll move to a question from Darcy. So Darcy has a question. The backlog grooming presentation that we spoke about only talked about value. So grooming by value, or ordering things by highest to lowest value. What about the cost and effort versus value? Shouldn't those factors also be considered? How would you respond to that, Pete?
Yeah, for sure. So value is just the starting point for that prioritization. And Darcy is getting at a really crucial idea that, let's say we have two things that are both of high value, but one of them is a day of work and the other is a month of work. Well, clearly the thing that's high value in a day of work, we're going to probably tackle that first before we spend a month on the other one. So that sort of gets into size. So what we're really actually focused on is not value as much as it is ROI, return on investment, which is value divided by the size of the thing. So we do look at the value, but we also consider the size or amount of work involved. We also consider other factors like risk, efficiency, dependencies, urgency. There's some things that are very, very valuable, but only if we can get them done quickly. So that's sort of like time to market factor. So product owners actually have to consider a whole bunch of factors. And even, just thinking about value by itself, that is itself a huge question. I'll just give a little glimpse, Darcy, and you might be interested in, folks might be interested in this. This will just take me a moment to pull up real quick here. This is something that it's a value checklist that I created for product owners. And this is kind of like the baseline of the things that as a product owner, I think about when I'm determining the value of a product backlog item, a feature, and it starts with the obvious stuff like how strongly do people want it, but it gets into things like, user growth, loyalty, retention, stickiness, frequency, duration of use. Will it provide publicity, PR, word of mouth benefits? Does it make us more innovative, more adaptable? Does it give us access to new markets, improve visibility or measurability, other abilities? Does it allow functions to be outsourced or insourced? Does it, handle legal compliance? A whole bunch of different factors. And this is just for value. And obviously, estimating or considering other things like dependencies and risk and efficiency and urgency and all of those are, similarly complex. So bottom line, product owners have to think about a lot of stuff.
Great. I think that probably hopefully gives more color to the comment about value task. I'll move on to another question that I got from Anna, who happens to run a IT company herself here in Colombo. So she has a very operational question. So again, like if you can't think of any tools off the top of your head, Pete, we can always take this up offline. So she's asking, what are your favorite tools for visualizing complex product roadmaps for product boards and stakeholders?
It's really tough. I mean, I guess I have to admit I'm perpetually dissatisfied with this. I've tried a whole bunch of different tools. I've worked with a whole bunch of teams that have used, a whole bunch of other tools as well. And I have yet to find one that I feel like really nails it. I mean, part of it is a function of what are we trying to communicate, and who are we trying to communicate to, and I think it's maybe less a question of what's the exact tool that we use to visualize it, and more what's the story we're trying to tell. Because when you think about it, like you take something like a product roadmap, I mean, it really is a story. It's a story about how we see the future. And it's a story that we want to tell people and have them comprehend and give us feedback on ways in which that story doesn't hang together, or where that story doesn't, have the sort of the grand ending that we want it to have. So it's like figuring out, like, how do we tell a clear, compelling, rich story that people can comprehend and give us valuable feedback on. And I found, as a product owner in the past, I found myself falling into the trap of like coming up with product roadmap visualizations, for example, that are incredibly complex and super impressive. And it captures everything in a massive diagram, but it doesn't actually tell the story. And people, stakeholders, senior management, don't really get it. And they nod their heads like they're getting it, but they don't really get it. And as a result, you wind up very quickly getting out of sync with each other, and that causes all sorts of problems down the road. So I guess rather than recommending a single tool, I guess I'd recommend a sort of a cognitive strategy, which is find a way to tell a story, and people are going to connect with that much more immediately. And I think you'll find that road mapping exercise and that involvement of those stakeholders is probably going to produce more value and more improvement to the roadmap overall.
Sure. So basically, in a nutshell, humanize the product, humanizing the product over tools. I guess that's the gist of it, right?
Yeah, or sort of going back to, I mean, look, here's the basic reality. We are like our species is 10,000 years of quote civilization, and a few 100,000 years before that of campfires. So we're much more campfire oriented, and what happens around a campfire? We tell stories about what happened in the past and what could happen in the future. And I feel like anytime we can bring a story into an interaction, it's gonna cause a quality of connectedness for the people that would not otherwise be there. And so I look particularly when I'm as a product owner, when I'm trying to engage stakeholders and engage senior management and get their focus. I mean, it's like, our CEO is the single most attention deficit person in the world, and I'm not saying my CEO or your CEO, but CEOs in general. And so it's like, you got to have a compelling story to tell them and make it a story. And I guess that's maybe what I boil it down to. But yeah, it's very much part of the human aspect.
Great. So I think we probably have a few more questions in the offing while people kind of think about what they want to ask you. I'll detect a question that's probably of interest to most of the local crowd who have joined in, because I see that quite a few of them are most likely to be project managers, business analysts, and so forth. And I think a lot of them would have joined this session because they have an interest in product management. And in the Sri Lankan ecosystem, product management is a new role. Product owners, product managers are they're just kind of getting formalized as a formal role within the IT setup. What would you say is the way for someone in a let's say a project management type of role to get into product management? Would it be via proactively suggesting things within the project that they're in and building up to that role, or is there any sort of certain attributes that would be important for taking up the product management role?
Yeah. I mean, it's a question I often get asked, and I wish I had a sort of a roadmap. Like how do you transition from project manager to product manager? One thing I've observed, though, the people who do make that transition, I mean, they do it in a whole bunch of different ways. There's not obviously just one way to do it. But there's a characteristic that I think a lot of those folks have, which is, think about a project manager. I mean, they are hyper focused on, delivering something on time, on budget, at high quality, and it's really, they're focused on, delivering a thing. Great product managers are certainly focused on getting that thing into the hands of their customers, but their primary concern is not the delivery of the thing. Their primary concern is delivery of the value that thing is going to give to those customers. So I guess you could say it's almost a shift from a mindset of like, get it done, to a mindset of get the value maximized. And it's an important shift, because, I've seen product managers that were all about just get it done. And they tended to deliver products that weren't very good. And I've certainly seen product managers who were not at all about get it done, and they wound up never getting anything out the door. So it's like trying to strike a balance, but it's as a, like if I were a project manager, I wanted to set myself up to, be more viable in a product management role. I'd really start focusing on what's the high value stuff? Like, what's the stuff that really matters? Like if we were to look at a list of all of our features and we had to get rid of half of it, which half would we cut? Like that's a question I've asked in job interviews in the past when I was in product organizations interviewing product managers. Okay, when we sit down, we'll pull up a product like Google Maps. Okay, if you had to cut half of the functionality here, what would you cut and why? Like, those are the kinds of questions that I think talented product managers could give you an answer to, and or could reason through, could think through credibly. So it's like shifting that mental focus from the sort of get it done, get it out the door, to what's valuable, what's most important. How do I create something that has just enough of the, I mean, you think about great products, and great products tend to be things that are very useful, but not just useful, they're pleasurable to use. They have a little bit of the sort of the magic dust sprinkled on them. There's some little bit of delight that really sticks with you, that makes you want to tell other people about it. I mean, it's, so it's like figuring out, what is that stuff that I think, someone who aspired to becoming a product manager would start to train themselves in. And the wonderful thing is, this is something you can train yourself in. This is something that in the course of being a project manager, you could be asking even just yourself these questions and start training yourself to think in that way. I think that could be a valuable exercise.
Great. Thanks, Pete. I think that's a very astute answer. Let me jump to another question from Slido. This one's from Gimanta. I'll be paraphrasing this question a little bit. So his question is really about how do you handle various stakeholders trying to pressure the team to deliver faster. This generally, ends up with bad results, bad quality, and so forth. But I think it's a fact of life. We are all working in software development. We know that it's a fact of life. How do you kind of handle different stakeholders trying to push the team to go faster?
I go to those stakeholders and say, we want to go faster. Here are the 5 things that are slowing us down the most right now. I mean, it's like you're driving a car that has a flat tire and it's dragging a crate along the ground, a crate filled with concrete blocks. And it's going very slowly. You're driving a car with a flat tire and it's dragging a crate of concrete blocks and it's going very slowly. Now, you want to go faster. How do you go faster? Option 1, press harder on the accelerator. Now, is that going to go faster? Well, it will for a little while until that flat tire actually burns up and you're running on a bare rim, or your engine catches fire because you're running in the red line. So what's the alternative? Reduce the impediments. Stop and fix the flat tire. Ask yourself, why are we dragging this crate full of concrete blocks along the ground? Maybe if we loaded the blocks into the car, we're not dragging them along the ground, we're actually driving them in the car, or maybe we put wheels on the car, or maybe we don't need to be pulling these concrete blocks at all. So again, it's that mindset shift from like if you're working with house painters and you want the house painted faster, you say paint faster, and they slap the paint on faster, and yeah, it's messy and they spill a lot. They're probably going to wind up using more paint than they really need to, but they'll get it done faster, because there's certain kinds of work where you just go faster, it gets done faster. But software development, at least in my experience, good software development is not like that. Good software development, you force people to go faster. Past a certain point, you're actually going to go a lot slower. You're going to go a lot slower because what they're building isn't very good. They're making a lot of mistakes. They're building up technical debt. They're starting to burn out. Your best developer is starting to spend time looking for jobs elsewhere. It's just, I feel like it's a classic mistake that some organizations make of the way we make a team go faster is just pushing them harder. And to me, it often just betrays a fundamental misunderstanding of what the act of software development is about. And, and sometimes it takes reminding, because a lot of times the people in management are doing this, there are people who themselves were once upon a time software developers. And, and maybe they were the kind of coders who could drink, a quart of coffee and stay up all night and still produce beautiful code. And, once upon a time in my life, I thought I could do that, but I realized actually that was just rose-colored glasses. And what I was producing was actually not that good when I was tired. I mean, tired developers tend to make bad decisions, a lot of dumb mistakes. And hurrying developers, rushing developers tend to do the same. And, reasonable people could disagree on this point, but I think I'm right. So maybe Himanshu, was it Himanshu who asked that question? I can't remember the person's name.
Givanta.
Oh, sorry, Givanta. Yeah, I would say, honestly, going back to, the first part of the talk, this, just show them this diagram here, just take a screen capture of this and show it to them and say, look, is this the reality? And just ask the question. Don't even try to convince them, just say, what do you think of this? Does this graph speak to you? And then show them, this, this is a much better way of producing faster results and better software, in my experience.
In your experience, what's the most common impediment?
Most common impediment is miscommunication. People spending time building the wrong thing because they don't understand what they should be building. People guessing when a simple question could erase a doubt. I mean, it's essentially, I mean, and I do spend most of my time working with geographically distributed teams, so that's a particularly severe impediment for those teams. It's people working really, really hard producing the wrong thing, and then having to redo it, and or getting stuck and getting kind of into a state of paralysis where they feel they can't move forward, when a simple conversation could clear up that question and allow us to move forward. I mean, we're teams that spend an extraordinarily long time building very complex stuff that's not that important, but they didn't realize it wasn't that important. I mean, classic examples are, teams who will spend, a week working their tails off building some very small piece of functionality that when the product owner discovers they spent a whole week building that tiny thing, they said, why did you do that? That wasn't worth a week, that was worth half a day. But if it was more than half a day, I'd say just don't work on it. So a lot of these things just come down to creating an environment where the developers who are doing the work can ask questions very easily and not be afraid of asking dumb questions, and where they can show things early and often. Like another classic impediment is teams feeling like they can only show really finished, polished stuff to the customer, but then they wind up going way too far down the wrong path if they're building the wrong thing. I mean, as a customer, I want to see rough stuff early and often, so that if a course correction is needed, we can intercept it before the team gets too far off track. So, so as a product owner, I'm going to be constantly trying to communicate to teams like, it's okay, show me something that's rough, show me something that's not yet fully working, show me something every day so that I can catch the stuff that's wrong before you spend too much time building the wrong thing. So those are the kinds of things, but a lot of it it really does come down to communication problems that at their root often come from trust problems. So.
Sure. I think you flagged a lot of things that we would have agreed with from experience there. So we've got a couple of other questions. I think we will take one more and wrap it up, because I know it's getting late, particularly for the crowd from Sri Lanka. So we'll dive into a question from Kayatri. The question is it possible to remove and add product backlog items in the middle of a sprint? And how does this affect the sprint?
Yeah, well, one of the rules we have in Scrum is that we're not changing the sprint goal during the sprint. So, for example, the goal of the sprint might be something like, we're going to implement customer payment with credit card. So we're keeping that goal for the whole sprint, but we can remove, for example, if we're halfway through the sprint and we discover we're not going to finish all 5 of the product backlog items necessary for completing credit card payment, we can put one of those back to the product backlog. That's not considered changing the sprint goal. The sprint goal is still enabling credit card payment. It's just we're not going to enable quite so much of it because we realize we bit off more than we can chew. So we can put things back to the product backlog, or if we realize we can pull a little bit more in, we can do that. So it's sort of like during a sprint, we don't change the direction or focus of the sprint, but the quantity of work we often do adjust, because we discover maybe we bit off a bit more than we can chew, or maybe we have a little bit of extra time, we can do a little bit more.
Sure.
Does that make sense?
Yes, I think that makes perfect sense. And again, like that's a practice that we follow as well at Calcey. So we've got a couple of more questions, and there's a couple of questions about, would this recording be shared and made available later? Yes, of course. And
Sorry to interrupt, Mudit. Before I lose everyone, I did want to share two real quick things. First, you can download the presentation at this link. And if you found this helpful, you might want to take a look. This is a video I created recently. It's an Agile project walkthrough. It's 20 minutes, and it basically takes you through an entire project from minute one through to delivery in Scrum in 20 minutes. So, and I've had feedback from people that was really helpful in sort of understanding concepts that maybe had eluded them. So anyway, sorry to interrupt, Mudit, but I wanted to share these with folks who might be interested.
No worries. I was actually just about to get to that. Is there any sort of reference material you'd like to leave them with? So thanks for flagging that, Pete, and having that ready. So I think there's another question about does Calcey have remote work opportunities currently? Yes, of course we do. We are always hiring, and Calcey is a remote first company. So majority of our folks work remotely right now. So please do check out our website and reach out to us. So I'd like to wrap up firstly by thanking Pete for making time for this session. I couldn't mention this at the beginning, but Pete's typical sessions are booked out months in advance. So we really do appreciate Pete making time like this to share his immense experience with us. And it was a pleasure having you, Pete. And we look forward to continuing this and hopefully making this into a series of sessions. I think we've seen some interesting sort of questions, and I'm sure we'll get some feedback from the participants as well. And to everyone who joined, thank you guys for making the time and joining the session. I think we had a pretty consistent number of participants throughout the session. So I'm sure a lot of you took away some key insights from this, and please do feel free to share your feedback with us. We will circulate a feedback form as well in due course, and gather your thoughts, perhaps what we can tackle in the next or upcoming sessions. So with that, good night, and we'll call it there. Thanks again, and we'll see you at the next session.